They tried to erase Earth. But we remembered. And when the galaxy listened, it changed forever. Subscribe and carry the memory forward. The sky over Tarsus didn't just burn, it shuddered. From the surface, it looked like the clouds were being peeled back, one after another, revealing layer upon layer of angry orange light. But it wasn't fire. It was gravity, folding in on itself. Above the city's central spire, a rupture opened in high orbit. Black, jagged, humming with vacuum static. Not a ship, not a storm, a presence. A wound in the fabric of space, surrounded by silence so absolute that all planetary comms dropped for 7 full seconds. Then came the first sound. Not a scream, not language. A single note, resonant and unrelenting. Everyone heard it, not through ears, but within themselves. And then came the fall, not of buildings, not of systems, but of faith. Because the people of Tarsus had believed they were beyond war, beyond invasion, beyond Earth. Tarsus was the crown jewel of the Coalition of Nine, a post-human splinter civilization that had abandoned Earth centuries earlier, declaring its culture stagnant, primitive, and unworthy of continuation. They had taken the best of humanity's genetic legacy, its artificial intelligences, and its technological framework, then rewritten their own history from zero. The word Terran had become a slur. Until now. Until the thing in orbit reached down and plucked their orbital defense grid apart like paper. No weapons. No light. Just a pulse, barely detectable, an impulse carried through dark matter distortion. In moments, the grid fell silent. The city followed. The Coalition's defense response was immediate. Fleet Prime mobilized from Enceladus Ring, scrambling 13 cruisers and 2 Dread-class vessels within an hour of the incursion. Orders were clear. Full-spectrum strike. No questions, no prisoners. But when the ships arrived at Tarsus, there was no enemy. Only the remnants of the station, folded inward like glass that had been remembered differently. No heat signature. No wreckage. Just absence. And the phrase, broadcast across every open channel in ancient Terran code. We have not forgotten. Back on Earth, no one cheered. The Order of the Ash, Earth's last surviving high command memory collective, watched the silent footage from orbit and said nothing. They hadn't acted in centuries. Not since the Excision Accords. Earth had withdrawn, retreated into itself, surrounded by walls of silence and automated deterrence. Any approach was met with dead broadcast bands and drifting orbital mines. But something had changed. Something had moved. And now Earth was answering. In the underground bastion of Aegis Core, beneath what had once been the Himalayas, Director Ansel Morin stood before the Deep Gate and activated Protocol 17. The old world would have called it treason. But there was no old world anymore. Only legacy. I need the Arcborn, he said. The technician beside him froze. They were sealed, she whispered. No one's spoken to them in 200 years. Morin stared into the light of the core. I'm speaking to them now. The Arcborn were not human, not anymore. They were the last survivors of the first wave of post-Earth exploration, modified, adaptive, bonded to the archive that held every Terran truth unfiltered and unforgotten. They had been too dangerous, too honest. When the Coalition of Nine seceded, it was the Arcborn who demanded confrontation. Earth refused. And so the Arcborn went to sleep, entombed in resonance pods that didn't age, didn't decay, didn't dream. Until now. The first to wake was Varatel. Her voice hadn't echoed in Earth's halls in 3 centuries. But the moment she rose, the core responded. Lights shifted. Rhythms pulsed. Memories flooded the room. Not just hers, but the world's. Tarsus burning. The Coalition sneering. The great silence after Earth's retreat. And underneath it all, one growing truth. They thought we were ashamed. They thought we were gone. They thought wrong. The signal from Tarsus was not Terran. Not officially. But the archive confirmed the resonance pattern. It came from beneath Earth. From the cradle of Ember, an old planetary system interface buried within the crust of the Atlantic sink. No one had touched it since the Exodus. It had activated itself. Broadcast on every Coalition channel. Earth remembers. And then more signals came. Not from Earth. From systems that hadn't spoken in generations. The moon colonies of the Ley 9. The broken rings of Polaris Fault. The drifting station monks of the Breather Chain. All of them sending back one phrase, over and over. We remember Earth. The Coalition of Nine panicked. They labeled it an insurgency. Declared emergency martial protocols across all border sectors. But their people didn't riot. They listened. Because even after centuries of separation, part of them had still dreamed of home. And home had finally spoken. The Coalition's official statement called the event a localized gravity breach, attributed to rogue black-site AI insurgency. But no one believed that. Not after the second collapse. Not after the way the ground remembered. On Rashara Prime, the street tiles rearranged themselves overnight into glyphs no one had seen in over 300 years, ancient Terran sigils from the Archive Age. The Coalition tried to cover it, sandblast the stone, shut down the feeds. But the people had already taken images, already compared the patterns, already found the match. In a proof we endured. In a proof we wait. In a proof we return. The glyphs glowed faintly under magnetic light, just enough to confirm it wasn't local. It was buried beneath, in the bedrock, had been there the whole time. Terran resonance coding. Earth hadn't just remembered. It had planted memory in matter itself. And now it was waking up. In secret vaults across old human space, known only to the most ancient planetary AI minds, long-silent archive nodes began to broadcast. These weren't standard storage arrays. They were memory anchors, devices capable of reinforcing cultural continuity through quantum informational gravity. Technology once theorized, never proven. But it was real. And now, it was online again. Each node bore the same message, layered into its harmonic pulse. Forget us, and we will still be here. Erase us, and we will grow from the absence. The Arcborn were the first to understand. They had lived with the archive not as database, but as organ, interfaced at the level of thought and instinct. Varatel, now fully reawakened, moved through the core like a storm wrapped in silence. She summoned the last of her kind. 7 Arcborn. All that remained of a species made not from biology, but from memory and motion. Together, they stood before the Aegis world map, watched the signals spread like blood in water. And they smiled. Not in joy. In readiness. Because Earth had not been waiting to reclaim its place. It had been preparing to reclaim its meaning. Coalition intelligence issued burn orders across known archive data centers. Tarsus was reclassified as a Tier 1 quarantine site. Units were dispatched to disassemble resonance traces and destroy rogue memory nodes. They never arrived. Each ship vanished. Not attacked. Not sabotaged. Just forgotten. Their names vanished from registry. Families stopped asking. Even their home AI systems stopped mentioning them. Only the archive remembered. And it remembered loudly. A single line posted across every Coalition terminal connected to outernet frequencies. You cannot delete what lives inside you. Meanwhile, the deep gate under Aegis began pulsing irregularly. The frequency was traced to an unknown external source. It wasn't coming from Earth. It was coming to Earth. From a vessel not seen in over 2 centuries. From beyond Coalition borders. From between mapped space. Designation, Eclipse Crown. Call sign, K7 Vindicator. Terran, Black Core Dreadnought. Classified missing in the dark between stars. Now transmitting at full strength. Message. The Concorde is not dead. The fire never left. We have seen what they built in your silence. And we are coming home. The message exploded through Terran exile zones. Worlds that had kept to the fringes, too afraid to reclaim their heritage. Now lit up with archive burst beacons. Words forbidden for centuries returned to the stars. Solkin. Echoborn. Witness of origin. Terran provenance. The terms meant nothing to the Coalition. But to those who had fled, who had been told Earth had abandoned them, it meant everything. Because Earth wasn't reclaiming territory. It was reclaiming its people. Varatel stood before the Hall of Silence, a vaulted chamber beneath the core, once used for treaty deliberations. She walked alone to the center stone. The light of the archive danced around her. She spoke one phrase. Not to the room. To the stars. If they think memory is weakness, then they will not survive what we remember. In response, Earth's orbit began to change. Not mechanically. Structurally. Buried above the cloud line, invisible to all but the deepest scans, the mantle array activated, 12 linked stations once thought defunct, now coming online in perfect synchronization. Each one a generator of layered memory space. Each one alive with Earth's full truth. They formed a ring. A resonance weapon. Not to kill, but to remind. When completed, it would be called the Chorus. A weapon made of voice, history, and trauma. A voice no tyrant could suppress. A weapon no empire could disprove. Because it would not speak to machines. It would speak to souls. The Chorus came online at 0600 Coordinated Terran Standard Time. 12 stations, each orbiting in geosynchronous rhythm, locked into harmonic alignment. No beams. No detonations. Just a low, planetary hum that could be heard even through vacuum if you were close enough. Felt more than heard. Like the echo of a cathedral bell striking reality itself. Coalition sensors went haywire. No kinetic signatures. No thermal flares. But every comm line began to carry memory. Not data. Memory. Whispers in old Terran dialects. Half-forgotten lullabies. War cries from extinct units. Cracks of celebration from the day Earth pushed back the collapse. Love songs sung in bombed shelters. Funeral rites spoken by children who watched too many stars fall. The Coalition tried to block it. But how do you block something carried not in frequency, but in empathy? On over 177 worlds, people simply stopped. They fell silent and listened. Some cried. Some remembered grandparents they hadn't thought of in decades. Some remembered being children on dirt that once had names like Kenya, Poland, Orinoco, and Tibet. Earth was not attacking. Earth was awakening them. Fleet Prime scrambled. Ships were repositioned toward Earth's orbit. An attack was deemed inevitable. But the moment the first cruiser crossed into Sol's periphery, its crew experienced something unknown. They began to recall, not hallucinations, their own childhoods, their mother's hands, their first taste of open ray, the feeling of fear when seeing Earth's gravity well for the first time. Even the commander, Fleet Marshal Say Anarin, a genetically uplifted coalition post-tribunal prodigy, froze mid-order, repeating a single phrase from a language she had never spoken aloud. My people call this place home. She recalled a fire, a field, a dog she hadn't owned. She remembered Earth, and she wept. The chorus wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror. But to the coalition, it was more dangerous than any fleet, because it made their people question. And nothing terrifies a control state more than collective remembrance. The coalition began arrests, fought crime enforcers, black site disappearances. But the archive nodes couldn't be silenced, because they weren't coming from Earth anymore. They were coming from within the people. Every mind that had heard the chorus began resonating. Each individual became a vector of memory. Each voice carried a piece of Earth. And when a voice is truthful, it multiplies. The exiled Dreadnought K-7 Vindicator dropped out of dark space near the fringe of Sol. Its hull bore ancient scarring runes from the Rift conflicts, burned trails from Concordance War-era plasma weapons, but it still lived. Inside, it carried over 200 Terran souls. Artborn, echo-scarred. Some no longer human in shape, but all still Terran in purpose. When they hailed Earth, there was no encryption. Just 6 words. Is there still a place? Earth replied with 7. There always was. You just forgot. And the Vindicator turned, not to Earth, but to the Coalition, and began broadcasting. Its signal wasn't a threat. It was a confession. The full records of the secession. The lies that formed the Coalition's foundations. The forced deletion of identity in the name of post-human evolution. A voice rang from the Vindicator's captain, an old woman with a face carved by radiation and decades of starlight. They left Earth not to become better. They left because they could not face what they were. The transmission lasted 11 hours. By the end, 9 planetary governors had defected. 3 coalition intelligence directors had issued apologies. And 100 million voices echoed the same phrase across the stars. We remember. Earth did not advance. It did not retaliate. It merely opened a door. A literal one. The Soul Gate, once sealed to all external entries, rotated in sequence. A message etched in void light scrolled across the axis. Return is not surrender. It is acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is the beginning of truth. For some, that was enough. For others, it was too much. Because truth changes everything. The Coalition's Supreme Forum convened. They declared Earth a Class 1 cognitive threat. They ordered the silencing of all chorus signals by force. But their fleets refused. One by one. Captains unresponsive. Crews too busy reading transmissions from Earth. Too busy feeling again. And then the Coalition made its final mistake. They ordered the Crucible Array, a memory suppression weapon, from their Rhea stronghold. Its purpose: destroy archive integrity across an entire star cluster. Erase not just data, but emotional resonance itself. They launched it. But Earth was already ready, because Earth knew the cost of forgetting. And it had vowed, never again. The Crucible Array ignited with a flash that eclipsed Rhea's sun. From afar, it resembled a clean pulse of white light, silent, clinical. But in its wake, memory broke. Entire planetary archive nodes fell dark. Emotional continuity collapsed. Worlds that had remembered their past suddenly stood hollow, disconnected from their own beginnings. On Antares Sigma, citizens forgot their ancestral songs. On Vinler Prime, children awoke screaming, unable to recall their parents' faces. The Crucible didn't just strike at data. It struck at identity. It was the weapon the Coalition had always threatened to build. Now it was real. And it had cut deep. Earth did not scream. It sang. The moment the Crucible wave rippled across Sol's edge, the chorus responded, not in retaliation, but in resonance. Its 12 stations amplified their signal, sinking to the emotional disruption frequencies left behind. Where pain had been, the chorus echoed remembrance. Where names had been lost, it whispered them back. Where identity had been severed, it rewove it. The sound was raw, not musical, not melodic. It was human, ragged, defiant, unbreakable. And all across the stars, survivors of the Crucible strike wept with relief, not because they had been healed entirely, but because someone had reached back for them. Because Earth had refused to let them vanish. But the chorus alone couldn't hold against another strike. It needed help. And that help came, not from military powers, not from fleets, but from the most unexpected source. The Archive Rebellion. They had no ships. No weapons. They were librarians, story keepers, memory binders, retired philosophers, exiled teachers, children who had saved family letters. And they rose. Across 47 systems, the Archive Rebellion broadcast fragments of their cultures, songs, funerary rites, recipes, declarations of love, and historic confessions. They flooded the void with stories. The Crucible's second wave never came. It didn't need to, because the Archive had made deletion impossible. Each time the Coalition erased one, 10 more took its place. Because when truth becomes shared, it becomes indestructible. The Coalition's leaders panicked. They issued full media lockdowns, blocked archive wavelengths, declared remembrance a form of narrative terrorism. But it was too late. The people had already changed. Some left their worlds and stolen crafts just to see Earth with their own eyes. Some stayed, speaking archive fragments aloud in public parks, whispering Terran dialects once outlawed. And others, those in power, chose a third path. They defected, not to Earth, to truth. They brought their archives. They brought their guilt. They brought their children. And Earth, in its infinite silence, accepted them, not with triumph, but with witness. Within the Soul Core, the Artborn gathered once more. Varatel stood atop the Aegis signal tower, a broadcast shard in hand. She had seen the Crucible's cost. She had felt it in her bones, the tremble of near deletion. And now, she would speak. To all of them. Every Coalition world. Every quiet corner of the galaxy. She didn't use force. She didn't beg. She simply said, "We remember who we were. We accept who we became. And now, we choose who we will be." She opened the archive in full. All of it. The wars. The betrayals. The genocides. The forgiveness. The rebuilding. She offered Earth's full truth. Nothing hidden. Because only in the whole truth could healing begin. The Vindicator transmitted its final protocol. Not a missile. Not an AI. A single name. One of the oldest ever uttered in the archive. Home. And suddenly, the Soul Gate shimmered. Not for war. For welcome. Because the archive didn't need to conquer. It only needed to be heard. And now, everyone was listening. It began with a ripple across the void, so small, it escaped the notice of every Coalition sensor array. A whisper. A flicker. A pattern older than language itself. Then came the voices. One at first. Then dozens. Then millions. Not shouting. Not commanding. Confessing. Across the stars, individuals stood before walls, mirrors, children, strangers, anyone who would listen, and began to speak truths that had been locked away for generations. My family helped burn the archive on Velmara. I was told it was for security. I now know it was fear. I used to mock Earth. I believed they abandoned us. I was wrong. They were the only ones brave enough to remember. My grandmother died repeating an old Terran prayer. I never asked her what it meant. Now I say it every night. These weren't strategic communications. They were testimonies. And they flooded the archive with resonance. The archive changed. Its growth was no longer linear, no longer limited to nodes or protocols. It had become self-sustaining, fed not by code, but by truth offered freely. Each new confession became a bridge. Each bridge a network. Each network a shield. The Deroxy had been silence. The Coalition had been lies. But Earth? Earth was now truth with a voice that wouldn't die. In Coalition High Command, panic bloomed. With every confession broadcast, their own data systems buckled, not under attack, but under contradiction. State-sponsored archives began to collapse. Histories rewritten for political ends began to fracture. Simultaneous versions of the same events clashed. And everywhere, people chose the honest ones. The ones that included pain, failure, shame, because they felt real. And when enough people believe in what's real, power built on deception cannot hold. In response, Earth did the unthinkable. It invited the Coalition to visit. No traps, no demands, no negotiations. Just coordinates, a signal, and a place. The Vault of First Flame. Located deep beneath Earth's crust, it was where the original archive node had been constructed after the collapse. Where the first stories had been saved by hand, by survivors who had nothing but their voices and their memory. The Coalition refused, but others did not. Leaders from the Outer Rim arrived first, low-tier functionaries, archivists, ship captains. Then came the governors, the officers. Eventually, one Coalition strategos came. They all stood in the vault. Watched the records play. Not stylized. Not dramatized. Real. And for many, it was the first time they'd ever seen humanity as it truly was. Flawed. Brilliant. Terrifying. Kind. Then came the Deroxy. No one expected it. A single monolith ship emerged at the edge of the Kuiper cloud. The same species who once devoured civilizations with silence. Now they returned to witness. They made no move. Transmitted no message. But the archive read them. And Earth remembered. Aboard the Soulgate station, Artborn interpreter Lelevo walked to the observation deck and spoke the words. We remember what you took, but we also remember that we survived. You erased our stars, but you could not erase our stories. The Deroxy responded. One pulse. Encoded. Simple. Not anymore. And just like that, the weapon of fear that had loomed for centuries vanished. The Deroxy left. Not defeated. Changed. Because Earth had done the impossible. It had turned memory into diplomacy. Now, the Coalition had only one choice left. Integration. Or isolation. Most chose the former. They came to Earth, archive open. Sat in the vault. Spoke their truths. Listened to others. They did not always agree. But they learned. And that, more than anything else, was victory. High above, in orbit, the chorus sang. Its voice now carried not just Terran stories, but tales from across the galaxy. It was no longer Earth's alone. It was everyone's. And it rang with a single message. You are not alone. You were never alone. You were only waiting to remember who you are. Years passed. Not in silence, but in song. The chorus never ceased its hum, but the tone shifted with each cycle. What began as Terran memory became a harmony of millions, Ziyari lullabies, Velnik epics, old Terran radio chatter, even Deroxy waveforms, now mellowed by reflection rather than fear. The galaxy had changed. Not with an explosion, but with a word, again. We remembered who we had been, and chose to build who we could still become. In the inner vaults of the archive, under Sol's magnetic hush, the oldest node flickered once. No command initiated it. No signal triggered it. Just a simple gravitational shift, like the planet itself exhaled. The node activated its final protocol. Legacy release. A moment long prepared for. One where humanity no longer needed the archive to remind them, because they had become it. Every child carried its song in their dreams. Every elder passed on stories not as duty, but as ritual. Every people, every species, remembered their first truth. We are what we carry, and humanity had carried everything. The Vault of First Flame became a sanctuary, visited by every sentient race in known space. Not to pay tribute, but to share. No guards. No idols. Only a chair, facing the Earth's mantle, and a screen that read, Tell your story. We're still listening. The Coalition of Nine no longer existed. In its place stood the Assembly of Remembered Worlds, a decentralized forum of species and cultures committed to one promise. That no story would be erased again. Each system, no matter how small, held its own archive node now. Connected. Rooted. Free. Not mandated by Earth, but echoed from it. And the Deroxy? They returned. Not as invaders, but as students. They brought fragments of what they had once silenced. Untranslated. Unformed. But raw with sincerity. The archive embraced them. And for the first time, the Deroxy built a monument. Not to conquest, but to a name they had once tried to forget. It read, Earth. Now, if you listen closely between stars, through dust clouds and magnetic distortion, you might hear the final message of the chorus, the last stanza added to its endless hymn. We burned. We bled. We broke. But we remembered. And so, we endured. And high above Earth, the mantle array still spins, surrounded by satellites shaped like books and obelisks and birds, each one repeating a simple phrase in 1,000 tongues. No one is forgotten. No one is gone. We are the story that never ends.